Hello and welcome to this morning's Talk at 10. This week, many non-essential retail businesses across the UK reopened their doors for the first time since lockdown. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy is encouraging those reopening to share their photos with the hashtag #OpenForBusiness. And the Prime Minister is urging consumers to shop and shop with confidence. Nevertheless, we are still a long way from high streets being able to open and get back to where they were pre-lockdown, if that's even possible. The 2-metre social distancing requirement poses a particular challenge. So, what will the future of West London's high streets look like in a post-COVID world? To try and answer that question, my expert panel today are Joe Davis, Employment Partner and Practice Group Leader at BP Collins. I have Atul Pathak, OBE, Managing Director of Apt Corporation, trading as McDonald's and West London Business Ambassador. Kath Shaw, Deputy Chief Executive at London Borough of Barnet and Programme Director for Economic Recovery at the West London Alliance. Francis Gallagher, Managing Director at HKS, and Diane Whirl, Marketing and Insights Director at Springboard. Throughout the programme, as always, my colleague Pim will be monitoring your questions, so please do keep them coming in by both email and the live chat window on YouTube. Now, don't forget, as always, that the West London Business Support Helpline is live. You can call our support volunteers at any time between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday, on 020 8607 2500. And there's also the website, coronavirus.westlondon.com. A big thank you to our partners Better Futures, who kindly support Talk at 10 webcasts. Better Futures is the Mayor of London's flagship programme to create a clean tech cluster across the capital. Now, if you're thinking you might like to apply for Better Futures, in order to be eligible, you must be an SME, that's having up to 249 employees and a turnover under 50 million euros per annum. You must have a London address. You should be developing or about to develop a clean technology. That's any product that has a good impact on the environment. And your business mustn't be a subsidiary or under the control of one or several other enterprises. So if you feel that's you, please fire a description of your project or product over to any member of the West London business team, and we can move the conversation forward. So let's get down to business. On the programme today, we'll be covering, first of all, some new insights hot off the press on West London retail trends and the footfall in our key town centres. We'll then be exploring with the panel how retail is reopening at the moment. And finally, perhaps most exciting of all, we're going to talk about the changing face of West London's high streets and what the future looks like. But first of all, we have a quick update on the changes to the furloughing scheme from Joe Davis at BP Collins. A warm welcome to the programme, Joe. I wonder whether you can give us a quick flavour of some of the latest changes that are happening. And I think as you speak, we're going to bring up on screen some sort of headline summaries from the Department for Business of what's changing. So over to you, Joe.
Thanks for inviting me. So the adjustments to the coronavirus job retention scheme introduces the concept of flexible furlough. So from the 1st of July 2020, employees are allowed to bring furloughed employees back to work on a part-time basis while still being able to claim the furlough grant for the hours not worked. In outline, furloughed employees will continue to receive at least 80% of their wages for the normal hours not worked, subject to a monthly cap of £2,500. So for an employee's perspective, much will continue in the same way, except that they can agree with their employer to come back to work for, say, a couple of days a week and be furloughed for the other 3 days. They will receive full pay for the hours they work and furlough pay for the days they don't. from an employer perspective, this provides the opportunity to slowly bring people back to work, matching staffing needs to business needs. So during July and June and July, the amount you can claim continues much as it is at present, but the government's contribution to furlough pay gradually tapers down over the following months until the scheme will completely close permanently, we're told, at the end of October. So from the 1st of August, the government continued to pay 80% of wages up to the £2,500 a month cap, but the employers are then going to have to pay the national insurance contributions and employer contributions, which apparently is going to amount to about 5% of normal pay for the average employee. From the 1st of September, the amount starts to drop, and the government will pay 70% of the wages, up to a total of £2,187.50 a month. And to make up the 80% total, subject to the £2,500 cap, the employer must pay 10% of the wages. So that's up to £312.50 per employee, plus the employer national insurance contributions and pension contributions. And then finally, in the final month of the scheme, from the 1st of October, the government will pay 60% up to £1,875 a month. And to make up the 80% total, the employer must pay 20%. So that's up to £625 per month for an employee on full-time furlough, plus, of course, the employer national insurance contributions and pension contributions.
Goodness. So as always, Joe, lots for us to be keeping track of in these government schemes as they evolve. It sometimes feels almost by the hour. Certainly by the day, there are new tweaks coming through. What's your take on terms of in terms of whether to be eligible for furlough from July, whether employees already need to have been furloughed? And alongside that, is there a limit on the number of claims that employers can make after July?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you had not been furloughed before the 30th of June for 3 consecutive weeks, which is the minimum period of furlough that you can claim for under the current scheme, then you won't be eligible to be furloughed in the new flexible furlough scheme, and I think the acronym perhaps belies the complexity of this scheme for all of us. But so the last date that you could have furloughed an employee that you want to furlough going forward was the 10th of June. So if you haven't done it yet, I'm afraid you've missed the boat. However, those returning from family-related leave don't need to have been furloughed before the 10th of June cut-off date. So provided their employers previously furloughed employees, they will be able to be furloughed. As to the other point, the amount you can claim in a single claim period from the 1st of July, you can't claim for more than the maximum number of employees you claim for under any claim for the period ending at the end of this month. So if you've made 3 claims so far, say 1 for 20, 1 for 30 and 1 for 50 employees, most you could claim for in any claim period going forward from the 1st of July will be 50 employees. And you need to agree in writing with the employee the pattern that they're going to work.
So clearly government now really trying to drive down the number of folk that are furloughed and get as many people back to work as quickly as possible. Any top tips for businesses starting to bring staff back from furlough?
I think the important thing I would say is to keep in touch with your employees. So when you need them back, they still feel part of the business. I think that many employees who at first felt that furlough was going to be awful have found that the reduction in pay has been compensated by the fact that they aren't going to, they're not paying to commute, they're not buying coffees or McDonald's for lunch, or they're not going out for dinner. So some will have got jobs in their new local supermarket or whatever while they've been furloughed. So you're going to want them back. I would aim to give them time to reorganise their lives, make them still feel part of your business. You can keep in touch with people provided they're not working for you. And so, having socials with them and just ringing them up to say, are you okay, is a good idea. And then give them a reasonable amount of notice if you are going to get them back. And don't forget, you're going to have to agree with them in writing what hours they're going to work and perhaps bring some back sometimes and some back another week, so that everybody starts getting back into it and shares the both pleasure and pain that furlough scheme brings.
Joe, thank you so much for those insights. Really great having you join us this morning for that quick update on the latest round of changes from government. I'm now going to turn to my panel this morning and our broad theme today of what the future of our high streets looks like. As always, at the top of the hour, I like to ask our panel what it's feeling like for you on the ground. It's a rapidly changing world that we now live in, and it's always fascinating to hear your personal take. So I wonder, first of all, Diane, whether you can share your reflections on what it feels like out there. We may have lost Diane's audio there. I don't know whether Diane is on mute. The tech gremlins seem to be against us this morning, unfortunately. Now, whilst we try and reconnect with Diane, I'm going to turn to Atul for your take on what it's like out there. Atul.
Hi, Andrew. We are in really unprecedented times. Now, something like this has never happened, in our generation, and hopefully it won't happen in another generation to come. So these have been very, very difficult times for any and every business. So the most important thing for any business to do is to adapt. Now, McDonald's, when we closed, we didn't have to close because there was no government requirement for us to close. We did it because we felt it was the right thing to do to keep our employees safe and our customers safe. So we closed it at that time, and now we are slowly opening it, keeping in mind the safety of our customers and our employees. So we recently opened a number of our stores and slowly opening more and more stores. And as we open, the most important thing is to give a message to our employees that it is safe to return. And we're constantly talking to our people. And on a recent survey last week, all the employees who have come back, 84% of our employees feel that they are safe in working in McDonald's. So which is a very encouraging sign for us. Now, we have actually spent a lot of time and energy to make sure that we take safety of our employees very, very seriously. So our kitchen has the screens to segregate them, and we have social distancing. We take the temperature when they come in, and the hand washing is in place. And obviously, we have no customers coming in, but we are slowly introducing customers coming in for later on this month.
So presumably, Atul, whilst a number of your staff, or even majority of your staff, will have been on furlough, your core management team have been kept very busy figuring out all those practicalities of how to reopen.
Well, some of my people were not furloughed, but that's the advantage of being part of a big brand like McDonald's, is that we have a very big support system. So behind the scene, McDonald's team have been working. Now, obviously, we are a global brand, and so we have a knowledge in other markets where we had this issue, coronavirus, and how we have come out on the other side. So we can take a lot of learns from the other markets and also adapt it to our situation and come up with solutions that works for us.
Fantastic. I think we'll be picking up with you more later in the programme on some of those details. But I'm now hoping that Diane's connection is working better for us. As really looking forward to getting your take, Diane, on what recent days and weeks have felt like.
Can you hear me?
We can. You're live.
Excellent. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating over the last 12, 13 weeks with regard to footfall. So at Springboard, we track footfall across the UK. That's the volume of customer activity in our retail destinations. And in London, we have a very, very strong coverage, a strong network. And in outer London, even we have around about 46, 47 counting locations. So we're very able to see what's happened, and we've been able to see that footfall's dropped to an unprecedented low, and you would expect that obviously because the whole of retail is shut down. And it really tipped over the precipice when lockdown started. So we went from a drop of about 10%, which was greater than normal, down to a drop of about 70 or 80% across the board. And the drop was even greater in central London, as you would expect. That went to 90%. But in outer London, we've seen drops of around 80%. And there's been a slow uptick in footfall over that period. As each week passed, there was a slight rise in footfall. So as retail opened, we'd seen the smallest decline year on year that we had the entire 12 weeks.
Fantastic. Now, in a few moments, I'm going to be coming back to you, Diane, to talk us through the northwest London data and what that's telling us. But I've no doubt that your phone must have been ringing in recent weeks with your customers wanting to unpick this data and check that these start numbers are indeed the reality, because they are staggering.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've been publishing our data on a daily basis on our website, so that's there for everyone to dip into and have a look at. And it's really just about offering that support to all of our high street and our retail destination clients, helping them understand what is happening. And so, yes, we've been inundated with client work, obviously, and of course the media have been very interested in as well to try and get a handle on the impact of the lockdown on retail and retail destinations.
Because, I mean, you really are, in terms of the technology you deploy, a pioneer in smart cities, because you've got cameras that are capturing data in real time as we speak.
Yes, absolutely. Our counters and their little electronic devices that are located either on the outside of buildings or on light poles, they're tracking footfall 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we're actually capturing the data, as you say, in real time and uploading it into the internet. So for example, I would be able to have a look at what's happened this morning right now because we've got that data. So it really gives us a real hands-on.
Absolutely awesome technology. Now I'm going to bring Kath in from London Borough of Barnet and the West London Alliance team for your take on what's been, I imagine, very, very long days trying to bring the local government response together. Kath.
It's not looking like it's letting me unmute.
Okay, well we can hear you. We can hear you. So fire away.
I'm unmuted, but great. Now my internet has held up beautifully through the whole of lockdown, and now there's a thunderstorm happening. So I unfortunately didn't hear what Diane said, but hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Yeah, you're right, Andrew. I think it's probably been quite a different experience being in the public sector compared to being in the private sector through lockdown, and we've been hugely busy. I think on the way into lockdown, it was busy, but it was very clear what our priorities were. So we were really focused on setting up new services to distribute PPE to care homes, to feed the vulnerable, to enforce social distancing in parks, all kind of new activities, as well as moving the organisation online and working from home. We've got about 80% of our staff working from home at the moment. But at least it was absolutely clear what our priorities were. I think on the way out of lockdown, it's almost busier because we are still doing the services that were running through lockdown, such as the PPE distribution, also focusing on that immediate lockdown exit priority, and starting to think kind of a bit more creatively and strategically about what the world looks like as we go forward, and how we take the opportunity that the sort of COVID reset has given us to kind of reframe the way we do some things. We're using a framework of restoring some services, of reinventing some services, and retaining some of the things that we did in lockdown because some of them are good. So yes, it's pretty hectic in local government at the moment, but we are doing what we can to support our business communities, particularly in town centres, and get the grants out the door, of course, as well.
Indeed. I mean, we've obviously had lots of interest in recent weeks from the wider business community around the discretionary grants that have been going live in recent weeks across our local authorities. But also, I think all of our minds were focused last Friday when we saw the government data that 34% of our working age population across northwest London are now dependent on government support, which is absolutely staggering and gives us a sense of the scale of the response that is now going to be required from local government and partners. Now, I'm going to turn to Francis now for your take. You're obviously in the world of architecture, construction, development. Again, an industry massively disrupted in recent months. What does it felt like for you?
Well, thank you, Andrew, for the invitation to talk today. I think, as we started 2020, we were feeling really bullish about what the 2020 would hold for us. We are an architectural practice based in central London. We have around about 100 staff. Our focus is predominantly in healthcare, sports stadia, hospitality, hotels, commercial and education. And the reason why we had a business like this was purely and utterly for diversification, for when and if any issues happen to our economy. But we had never envisaged or planned for this pandemic that came around April, March time. So like many businesses and like many of the panel members we've heard from today, we had to act immediately. But I think the biggest lesson for us, as I said earlier, we're over 100 staff. But the biggest lesson and takeaway or silver lining to this cloud, I guess, is that we are now looking at our space in central London. We work over 2 floors. We have over 12,000 square foot, and we're now looking at halving it. We're looking at subletting 6,000 square foot because what we realise the use of an office, the way that we've been using our office, doesn't really work in the modern day when we've got technology like this in order to communicate. So. Just as the first takeaway from this, our space, as I says, we can accommodate over 100 architects. We've currently got one of our floors now up for sublet. Same amount of staff. In fact, we're growing in the sectors, in particular in health. But we now believe we can work far better from anywhere with this type of technology and with more collaboration tools and whatnot. So, again, with most things, out of necessity comes real innovation. And I think that's what we are doing. So we're going to walk the walk as architects and take that out to other firms as well by downsizing, our office footprint, but also making sure that we're still growing when it comes to us as architects in the sectors that we cover.
And that, Francis, reflects so many conversations that we've been having in recent days and weeks at West London Business, which one would assume, profoundly change the nature of the commercial office or landscape in central London, and perhaps throws up new opportunities for outer London in terms of the priorities that businesses perhaps set on an outer London versus central London location. But we'll come back. Let's hold that thought. We'll come back to it. I suspect a bit later in the programme. Diane, you set the scene for us wonderfully a few moments ago in terms of what the national data is telling us, but you've been able to crunch the numbers for Northwest London, and I think Joel is going to bring up the first slide of data for our Northwest London 7 boroughs for you to talk us through. Diane.
Yeah. Great, thanks Andrew. So this slide here shows footfall in West London High Streets, that's in the blue line, and also high streets across outer London generally, and that's in the orange line. And the data runs from the first week of the year, that's the first week of January, through to the end of last week by week. So we have 24 weeks across the bottom, and we can see very clearly and this is showing the percentage change in footfall from last year. So it's the year-on-year percentage change in footfall, and you can see at the beginning of the year that the change was very, very modest. Less than 10%, and in fact, generally we were looking in the normal world, the old normal, we were looking at percentage changes in footfall of around 2%, 1.5% to 2% a year generally across the year. So we can see that was fairly in line with what we would expect, and then as the COVID crisis started to escalate, so footfall started to drop, and we really saw that very strongly in weeks 10 and 11. And in fact, in West London High Streets and Outer London, the impact didn't really hit until week 11 to 12. So when the week before lockdown and people started to work at home and move out of London back into home offices. And by week 13, when lockdown was imposed, footfall then plummeted to 70% lower than it was the year before. And then the first few weeks of lockdown, it dropped a little bit further to 80%. And as I mentioned just before, there's been this slight uptick across each of the weeks. The trend has been for this slight diminishing of the drop. So by the time retail reopened at the beginning of week 25, footfall had actually been at the best place it had been since the start of the lockdown. And in fact, the West London high streets, the high streets that we track within your area, are following very, very closely the line for Outer London J.
And the one thing that struck me, Diane, particularly with this slide, was that it looked like, before the sort of crash, our northwest London high streets were lagging slightly behind the sort of wider outer London picture, and it looks like we're now sort of nudging slightly ahead. So does that imply maybe a more loyal sort of customer base in our local communities?
It does, Andrew, actually, and that dovetails with the results we're seeing across the UK. So across the UK, we've been tracking the different types of town and the impact of the lockdown on those types of town. And we've seen that actually the smallest towns have been more resilient than the larger towns. And we would expect that, because clearly you're not going to go into a city centre when you can't travel, but when all the stores are shut. And so the smallest towns have done better. And actually, Outer London did better than Central London, and the town, the West London Alliance area, are slightly more resilient than Outer London as a whole, which is very good news.
Yeah, no, it is nice to find a bit of good news in these times, and that some sort of new local loyalty sort of shining through, perhaps in some of our home workers or those that have been furloughed, trekking down to their local high street. Now, the next slide that Joel's going to bring up, I think starts to drill down into more specific town centres. So guide us through this.
So this is the average year-on-year change across the 24 weeks. So, and what we've done is we've just identified the different towns that we monitor within the West London area. And the orange bar is Outer London. So that's the Outer London average. So that's around 45 towns that we track, including these ones in blue. And all the blue bars are the individual town centres. And you can see that the year-on-year change did vary from a virtually stable footfall in Brentford through to a drop of over 50% in Ealing Road. And Outer London averaged about 30%. London's performed more strongly than the Outer London average. Harlesden, in addition to Brentford, Harlesden, Edgware, Wembley and Hounslow all did slightly better. And centres that were worse were Shepherd's Bush, Harrow, Ealing, Hammersmith and Ealing Road. So you can see there was a slight variation in performance over that period of time.
That's fascinating, and sort of again coming back to that loyalty point, and who's supporting their local town centres the most, or maybe being reminded to support their local town centres the most. We can see where that message is getting through, and perhaps where we need to ramp up the local sort of campaigns. Your last slide, I think, it's going to give us a flavour now of what's been happening this week.
Yes, and of course, this week is a critical week. Retail reopened on Monday in most places, and most retailers opened on Monday. So we saw a huge change in footfall, as you would expect. So this slide shows Monday the 15th and Tuesday the 16th of June. Now, rather than show year-on-year percentage change here, we're showing week-on-week. So we're comparing footfall on these 2 days with the same days last week by centre. And the blue line is Monday and the orange line is Tuesday. And we can see that there has been a huge uplift in footfall in a number of centres, particularly on Monday, in Ealing, Harrow and Ealing Road. And then to a lesser extent, Hounslow, Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush. And then the smallest increase on Monday was actually in Edgware. And then increase in footfall from the previous Tuesday was slightly lower than they were on Monday, and you would expect that because it's obviously it's not the first ever opening, but it's still significant. And Ealing has seen a big bounce back, and also Harrow in terms of footfall. So people have come back into those town centres on those first 2 days, which is really encouraging.
Yeah, no, that's great to see, but also striking the different stories of different town centres.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm sure other members of the panel may want to come back to you on some of those data insights later, and they'll, I think, perhaps be feeding the odd question through to Pim. But I'm going to move us on to our second theme of the morning now, around reopening retail, and I'm particularly keen here to hear from Atul first of all, on the some of the practicalities of unlocking, which I think has been occupying the minds of so many retailers in recent weeks. We're going to bring up on screen, Atul, whilst you talk. I think first of all some photos from a McDonald's drive-through, and then we may switch over to a slightly more improvised response of another local retailer. But Atul, what are your thoughts on making this happen?
Well, firstly, it's a very welcome that we are, the government have decided to ease the lockdown and given the opportunity for the retailers to open. And as you can see, in the news, there's a lot of excitement for customers who wanted to come out and visit the high street and visit the retailers. Now, obviously, because of the social distancing and the 2-meter rule, the retailers cannot have enough people in their shops, and that's a challenge. Now, I'm sure everybody's aware the government is looking at relaxing or perhaps revising the 2-meter rule. Now, there are some countries where the rule is only 1 meter. The other countries have 1.5 meter. So I think that only health professionals can decide what is the right distances. Now, it is exciting that we are beginning to open after such a long time. Albeit, our kitchen is not in full power because we have social distancing to follow. And also, when we open for customers to come in, we have to follow the social distancing rules. That means at any given time, depending upon the size of our restaurant, we can only allow a certain number of people to come in. And that will be a challenge for our staff as well as the business. So business will not get to the level we were before the lockdown, and we can only get to when the life becomes normal. But if you ask any business person and the people who are involved in business, it's still a welcome sign that we are able to open and able to have customers visiting us.
And in the photos we brought up, I showed another business. I think it was in fact on Chiswick High Road, who's been able to introduce Deliveroo for the first time. How have you found home deliveries have worked out for you? What's the appetite been across northwest London?
Well, delivery we started a few years ago, about 2.5, 3 years ago, and delivery has been a very successful platform for us. And as you know, the customers have changing habits, and we had to adapt to the changing needs of our customer. So a lot of customers prefer not to come out; they prefer to have the food at home. So we had toyed with the idea for many years, and we eventually rolled that out in the UK, and the delivery has been very successful. Now we have Uber Eats as a delivery partner, and now we are starting to work with Just Eat. So we will have 2 delivery partners who work with us to deliver food to our customers. And it's very successful, especially at this time when we open and we cannot have customers coming into our shops. So therefore, delivery is a very good platform for our customers to have their food delivered to their doorstep.
Yeah, no, I know my wife was delighted and relieved when she discovered that McDonald's was there on Uber Eats and Deliveroo. So you have one customer in our household. Very.
Let me correct. It's not Deliveroo. It's Just Eat and Uber Eats.
Just Eats and Uber Eats. That's clearly why I haven't been successfully placing orders, isn't it? So, there you go. There you go. Now, Kath, I think this reopening of the high street has clearly preoccupied the time and energy of many local government officers in recent weeks. I think we're going to bring up on screen for viewers some photos from Pitshanger Lane this week, where the shops have been reopening, and they've all been putting up these green Ealing open for business posters that they've been getting from the local authority. Can you give us a sort of flavour of your take on what it's been like in Barnet, and also what you're sensing across wider West London? Kath.
Absolutely, Andrew. Yes, I mean our focus has initially been. Can you hear me? Okay.
We can. Far
I can
away.
Hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay or not?
We can go for it.
Doesn't sound like you can.
We can.
You can. Brilliant. Yes. So we've been focusing very much on the public realm. I am talking. We've been focusing very much on the public realm. And the use of public space. We've reclaimed quite a lot of public space by closing parking spaces down, and then we are looking at how we sort of distribute that space between three different things really. One is businesses that want to trade outside. A lot of our retailers on our high streets are quite small internally and can't easily social distance, so they want to put goods out on the street. So we've been looking at that. We've been looking at creating more space for walking and cycling. You'll have seen lots of pop-up cycle lanes appearing across London, recognising that we want to keep people off tubes and buses as much as possible. And then the third use, of course, is queuing. And we've seen Monday, Tuesday this week, particular queues outside banks and post offices in Barnet's town centres. Ealing have obviously launched their campaign this week. We are launching our Use Your Local High Street campaign next week. That was a conscious decision because we thought we wanted everyone to have a little bit of a chance to feel their way this week before we got the hordes to descend on them. So from next week, you'll start to see a media campaign from Barnet in terms of how people should get back to their local high streets. And I'm intrigued by Edgware being the lowest of those major high streets that Diane talked about in terms of its return to footfall. It also perhaps I think took less of a shock, so maybe people have been out and about more as they've gone along. But I do wonder if there's a bit of a Brent Cross effect as well, because we know that Brent Cross Shopping Centre, which is in the south of Barnet and just a few tube stops away from Edgware, was very busy on Monday, and in fact by 3 o'clock it had 3 times as many visitors as it had for the whole of the previous week. So possibly people went and queued outside Zara in Brent Cross rather than returning to Edgware initially, but with our campaign next week I hope they'll be very much back in the local town centres. The other thing we're doing is we've got quite a lot of volunteers recruited to go out and about in our town centres to assist advising retailers on how they can manage social distancing, and also feeding back to the council in terms of where the hotspots are, where we might need to do some more signage or lines about social distancing. And that's it. Yeah. That's
interesting and encouraging to hear. We've certainly been picking up that there's been quite a bit of discussion around the use potentially of apps to assist with queues outside stores. So people will sort of, I suppose, register for a space in a virtual queue to try and take the pressure off our pavements. But we've also been very struck by a campaign called UK's Grand Outdoor Summer Cafe. I think we're going to bring up that website on screen now for our viewers, perhaps to dip in. Kath, is this summer going to be the summer of the Grand Outdoor Cafe, do you think? We may be having difficulties with Kath's audio link. I think we'll hold that thought of the Grand Outdoor.
Well, hopefully the weather will stay as it's been through March and April and May to enable that.
Fantastic. It is desperately weather dependent, the outdoor cafe, and whether it will indeed materialise. I'm going to thank you for all those reflections, Kath. I'm going to take us on to our third and final theme of this morning, of the changing face of West London's high streets, and turn to France's first of all. I know you've been doing some really imaginative and creative work in over the past 12 months or so with French esports organisation Team Vitality to design their new Paris headquarters, a whole sort of fusion, from what I understand, of technology, retail, fashion and sort of esports. Can you tell us more about the project and perhaps what insights it gives us for the high street of the future, Francis?
Yeah, for sure. Esports for us came onto our radar, I guess, I'm going to say about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was just a natural next step for us as we designed stadia, for different sporting facilities and spectator events. But quite simply, is esports are in gaming actually continue to grow, and the need for actually treating this competition far more seriously. There was a real need for us to create an event space that could actually house this and actually showcase it. So, as you can imagine, I suspect we've all went into gaming zones throughout time. This is a very highly developed, highly technological space. Phenomenal finishes, which demonstrates and represents what's the best in esports and people who are actually doing this within gaming. The good thing about this, in order to create event space like this, all you really need is big boxes, floor to ceiling heights, enough services, and then obviously it's about the furniture, the FF&E. So when you look at the retail, the high street, any large retail unit that potentially could be coming up for reuse, this could be potentially a usage that we actually could take to that. And throughout the UK at the moment, every city in the UK, we're looking at esports venues within disused, either a unit within a disused shopping centre or a standalone. And it's amazing over the last 2 years how this is rapidly, and I mean rapidly, just taken off. So it feels like there's a new genre of how we're going to entertain ourselves. The question is where we locate this. Is it out of town, or is it going to be inner city, or a mixture of both? And I think what we're seeing is definitely more of the inner city at the moment, Andrew.
And I suppose what's intriguing with esports is, of course, that is an industry that started online in people's homes and living rooms, and it's now migrating across to the high street. But it is clearly very experience based and about people coming together as a community of gamers or gaming enthusiasts. What do you think that tells us about the retail businesses that are likely to survive moving forward?
It's a great question, and I think this runs in parallel when you quite simply look at the share prices of organisations that are based in technology, they're based in shopping, who do it well. They seem to be doing well for this pandemic and through these times, and the fact that the majority is now through necessity have to do quite a lot of our shopping online, and the fact that we do our shopping online, we're now more readily reaching to get our entertainment online, and whether that is through virtual gaming or watching Netflix or watching Amazon Prime. Our world is so intrinsically linked now with the online world that I think for me, the high street, the shops within the high street, I don't think it's dying. I don't think the high street's dying at all. I think it's just about changing and planning for the what do we need it from the short term, the medium term, the long term. And these are the type of conversations and what we need in the short term, medium and long term. What is it we need and what do we expect? Because I think when we get involved in conversations about the high street is dying, what's the answer? It's a gradual answer, and it's all about continual change. And I think planning it out that way and responding to the online lives that we all now have, I think for me is the way to do it.
And what's your hunch, Francis, in terms of the amount of retail floor space that might be needed moving forward in our town centres? Do you think it should be we should be protecting what we've got, or should we accept that there might be some switch from retail to residential uses on the fringes?
Absolutely. Not only switch from retail to residential, but it should be retail to health. It should be retail to education. I mean, these locations we call high streets, 99% they're well serviced by public transport. If we can get our car parking strategies resolved and we can make our town centres beautiful and safe, this for me will always prolong and give the real sustainable aspect to the high street. So, health, education, retail, sporting, we can everything. We can live there. I think bringing back the truly mixed use, because in the past when we talk about mixed use, it's about it's about living there, potentially working there, but shopping there. Let's bring in more uses and really make this an interesting mix of of what the high street of the future could actually be. This is what really inspires me.
Now I'm hoping that Kath's link has improved, but I'm sensing there's a bit of latency, so I'm going to pause after I've put my question to Kath for her response. But I think it'd be really fascinating, Kath, to get your sense of those reflections from Francis and how that's playing through in conversations amongst growth directors in West London and the sort of readiness perhaps for those changes in use of space. Kath, what are your thoughts? I'm not sure whether Kath's audio has recovered. Now, I may therefore turn to Atul, as we seem to have lost Kath's link, unfortunately. One of the conversations that we've been having in recent days, Atul, is how for some retailers it may now be a choice between setting up a business online versus taking the risk of a high street location. And my sense is that in your own business, you're now starting to move to a bit of a blended approach. You were describing how you now have delivery hubs in some locations. Can you tell us a bit more about how that's working for you?
Well, Andrew, as we all know, the high street, not only in West London or North London, but throughout the UK, has been at a consistent decline for the last number of years. And successful governments have made a lot of effort trying to revitalize and find out what the issues are in the high street. But, sorry.
Carry on, Atul. I think we're going to mute Kath.
Okay, all right. Okay, so the high street has always been challenging. And so for any business to survive on high street, we need to adapt and change in line with our customers' demands and customers' needs. So we have a large number of locations on the high street. We have invested heavily in our high street to make our restaurants.
Keep going, Atul.
Okay, so we have invested heavily in our high street restaurants to make it attractive for our customers to come and visit. Now, also, if our customer wanted the food delivered to their home, so we are also looked at delivery option as we talked about earlier on, so which is again very successful. But we're also looking at ways of areas where the demand is very high to have a delivery hub where the food can be prepared and delivered is purely for delivery. But the high street, in my opinion, has a role to play in our communities. And as Francis said earlier on, we need to adapt. It could be a combination of leisure, a combination of residential, combination of educational, and we need to really make it attractive, really need to make it trendy and experience-led. So people, if they venture out of their home to the high street, they need to have a positive and good experience. So hence, the parking needs to be improved, the facilities need to be improved, maybe more green spaces, but as well as for customers to have a very good experience so that they could come out to the high street and have a positive experience. And that's how we need to move forward.
Your point, Atul, around the practical necessity of free or very low cost parking in high streets comes up time and time again in the conversations that I have with town centre retailers, because ultimately you're often competing with multiples or supermarkets that are able to offer free parking space, which is difficult to compete with, isn't it?
Absolutely, and not to mention, I won't be doing my job properly if we didn't talk about the business rates, and the government really need to look at. And if a high street has to survive and compete with the online retailers, the government really needs to look at the business rates. It's a burden on a high street where the footfall is declining, business is tough. So government really need to look at assisting the business and taking that burden off and make it high street as competitive as online businesses. Otherwise, the high street businesses always have one disadvantage as compared to the online businesses.
Thank you, Atul. Now, I'm hoping that we've got a better line to Kath now, and that we can bring Kath back in for her reflections on how, from a kind of planning policy perspective, she thinks our town centres and high streets may need to change. Kath.
Thank you, Andrew, and hopefully you can now hear me. So planning policy, I think anyway, had been moving in the direction of much greater flexibility for the high street, because whilst COVID will have accelerated some of the trends that we've been seeing, those trends have been there for some time. So looking at greater flexibility to change uses, for example, to concentrate town centre uses perhaps in smaller areas, and then build more housing on the edges of town centres, which both has the benefit of meeting our housing challenge, but also generating footfall to support those town centres. So absolutely, those kind of more strategic planning issues are at the top of councils' minds and are making their way into local planning policies, along with some of those shorter term measures. I don't know if you heard me talk about or not, but things like greening the town centres so that people can enjoy sitting outside cafes and restaurants and so on.
Fantastic. So this sounds like a good time for investors and developers to be talking to our local authority partners around those potential changes of use Francis was talking about, as well as housing, the potential for health and education activities in town centres. But we've also seen a number of our local authority partners moving your own civic centres into high street locations. Now, I'm going to turn to Pim, who's been sort of busy tracking questions both on live chat, but also by email, for one or two questions from our viewers. Pim.
Hi Andrew, we've had quite a few questions come in this morning. So first one from Alfonso, maybe to Kath. In light of the pandemic and potential future ones, shouldn't the rejuvenation of the high street be much more of a key focus with regards to creating local sustainable hubs that reduce travelling distances? For example, having a local Specsavers.
Kath.
Well, I wouldn't want to comment on individual shops, but I think, yes, absolutely. The principle that I think we're going to see more people. I think we're going to see more people working from home, and that will mean that rather than doing things centrally, they're likely to want to go into a local hub, walk or cycle into a local town centre for their for retail and services, particularly, as we've been saying, for services such as health, education and leisure. So I think I very much agree with the spirit of the question there.
I was encouraged down on Chiswick High Road, I think last weekend, seeing queues outside a bike shop. I think we might have a photo to bring up of just the level of demand as people switch to cycling, and a bicycle shop almost overwhelmed by the number of visitors needing to be serviced. Anyway, back to you, Pim, for our next question.
Any of our panellists have any ideas for how the vulnerable and elderly and those where tech is also difficult can be supported?
Oh, Francis, I wonder whether that's one for you in terms of how the vulnerable and elderly could be kind of supported in new ways, perhaps on our high streets and in the sort of retail locations and offer of the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and again, it really feeds into what we've been talking about. We all know what UDPs are, unitary development plans, i.e., how we divvy up the countryside in our cities to make sure we get the proper uses in. And for me, we also now have to plan for us getting older. We've got care homes, but what happens after that? We don't have the ongoing facilities. So for me, when it comes to policy, when it comes to planning for the medium to the long term, what does it look like to have a world and a city where you can really live out your life to your full potential, rather than what we've got at the moment. And I think when you look in the US and other parts of Europe, they've got retirement villages, but these truly are villages where you can take up a hobby, you can do exercise. We need to be creative, far more creative, how we can actually keep people active, keep their mind active, keep their body and spirit active, and also keep their morale high. So, for me, when we're planning the high street, we're planning anything, we have to plan for all events and all people, So that's my answer to that, Andrew.
Thank you, Francis. Now, I think we've had a question come in on live chat for Diane, which is clearly you've been able to give us a sort of high-level view of what's been happening in footfall terms. But if we want to kind of drill down into what's happening sort of almost retailer by retailer, or the particular sort of, I suppose, parts of the high street offer, where might we turn to for that sort of data and insight? Where would you take a look?
Well, actually, that's exactly the type of data we produce. So the data I've shown today is very top level, but actually what we do is install automated counters, and in some places we install multiple counters, look at different parts of a town centre. So there may be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 across a town centre that are tracking activity within different areas of that town centre, and that data is actually set out and displayed through our reporting services by hour of the day. So you can actually go into those different locations and look at how footfall is performing by hour of the day in different parts of the town centre across every day, and that's 24 hours a day, and that's really the best way of seeing activity. And then we also use the same technology to track footfall into retail stores. So where there are retailers who want to understand how many customers there are coming through their doors, we can install our counters to help them do that. And of course they can then compare how many customers that come through their doors that come in the street, and they can work out essentially what is, we call their capture rate, but is essentially a market share. So how many of those people in the street come into their store, and they can see how that changes, and then see the impact of what they do in store on that. So if they improve their stock levels, they change their stock, they change their window displays, they improve their staffing, they change their staff schedule, all of those things will impact how many people come in their store, and they can see the direct impact of that. So they're able to very clearly see performance.
That sounds like it'd be the subject of a whole program of Talk at 10, doing a deep dive into how the different sort of bits of the high street offer are performing. But certainly a call to action for all of us to take a closer look at the research you're publishing and start building that back into our recovery planning and the practical advice that we're giving to new retail entrepreneurs. Now, as we come to the top of the hour, I think I'm going to put my final question to Atul, which is our West London Business Ambassador. Seems appropriate that we should end the hour with you, and that's to invite your reflections, perhaps to a young Atul. If you were to turn the clock back 20 years, and you were kind of contemplating, now kind of coming onto the high street. What do you think, your younger self should be thinking about in 2020 in contemplating perhaps taking on a unit for the first time?
Well, Andrew, whenever you start a business, whether you're young or old, you need to look at what your customers want. And no doubt, coronavirus will impact our shopping habits. And if we have any hope of ending the current slump, we must adapt to the changing customer trends. Now, many reporters who you might know from David Cameron's time, she was appointed to lead a review on the future of High Street. We said that 2-3 days ago at Emma Simpson program at BBC, that she feels that coronavirus will have positive impact on High Street. And as Kath also alluded earlier on, because people working habits going to change, people's shopping habits going to change, so there will be more footfall. Footfall may go up in the High Street. Now, only time will tell if that really happens. If that happens, that's really a very welcome sign for the High Street and the businesses on the High Street. Now, for any business, when you start, you need to look at, who your customers are, who your audience is, and then you tailor your offering according to their demand and what they would want. So you really need to do a lot of research and come back with the right product and services for your customers at the time when you start.
So really kind of emphasizing sort of the need to get back to fundamentals of understanding the market, your customer, points I suppose that really don't change over the decades, but also a note of optimism that this crisis is driving innovation and change at an accelerated rate, which is I think really exciting and hopefully tempting many West London residents, as we can see from the data, back to our town centre locations. Now, unfortunately, our time is up. An hour always flies by far too quickly, so it's really just as always for me to say a huge thank you to my production team, Pim and Janelle at West London Business and Joel at Revolution Audio. Thank you also to my guests who've shared so much with us this morning. Joe Davis, employment partner at BP Collins, Atul Pathak, OBE, managing director at Apt Corporation, trading as McDonald's, Kath Shaw, Deputy Chief Exec at London Borough of Barnet and Programme Lead on Economic Recovery at the West London Alliance, Francis Gallagher, Managing Director at HKS Architects, as well as Diane Whirl, Marketing and Insights Director at Springboard. As always, continue to share your thoughts with us and visit coronavirus.westlondon.com for the latest information and support. To speak to a human being about your concerns, call 020 8607 2500. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please click on the button below the video stream to stay informed and show your support for our work. Talk at 10 is taking a 1-week break, but please diarise Thursday the 2nd of July at 10 a.m. For our next episode, when we'll be looking at lessons learned from the 2008 financial crisis. Until then, as always, we wish you, your friends, family and colleagues good health, and please maintain social distancing wherever possible to stay safe.